The ancient Egyptian believed in the continuity of life after death, and in the right the deceased had in acquiring the necessity of this life in that world, and thus he had several beliefs connecting between death and the theories of creation and existence and the cycle of life. He invented mythologies about the relation of the sun with this operation in his daily journey in the morning, or the one that happens at night when the sun both crosses the netherworld from the west to the east. That trip is done through the body of goddess Nut, or through the eternal water of Nun, or other imaginary places and ways. It was a very strong belief of the ancient Egyptian in the afterlife, and it was extremely important for him to reach his place of final destination, where he'll live eternally, where the fields of Osiris exist. And to pass the situation of the judgment successfully, to guarantee that he'll escort the sun in its night journey, to make sure he'll be immortal with it. All these hopes became rightful for the individuals since the Middle Kingdom, after it was confined only on the kings in the Old Kingdom. By the beginning of the New Kingdom era, new funerary beliefs appeared and were considered a natural evolution of the pyramids and the coffins texts. These new beliefs are called the Book of the Netherworld, or the Afterlife Books. The main purpose of these funerary compositions is to prepare the deceased and provide him with the necessary knowledge about the other world, for their main subject is the possibility of gaining life back after death in the transitional Duat area that exists between the eternal water and the created world. The Book of the Two Ways is the oldest book among the religious books of ancient Egypt. It was named like that because of the existence of a map along the texts showing two zigzag ways near the middle section of the map, the Upper Waterway and the Lower Earthway. It was Shakespeare who called these texts that name. A new approach says that the Book of the Two Ways is one way only, and not two, but it had two aisles. One is celestial and one is in the ground, and accordingly, it could be called the Book of the Road or the Right Way. The texts of that book were recorded on the bottom part of the coffins of El Bersha, and it's considered a guide to what lies beyond it. It's supposed to provide the dead with means of having a happy wanted life after death, and it's considered the first attempt to describe the ancient world geographically by using planning maps. The book is different in its division than the other books of the netherworld, for it's distinguished with having two zigzag roads, the Upper Blue Waterway and the Lower Ground Black Way, which represent the second dark section of the sun's journey, completing its cycle and separating between them the Lake of Fire. The texts of that book were recorded in two copies. One of them is a long copy and the other is short. The journey of the sun happens here in the sky, where it starts from the east, not the west, like in the rest of the known other worlds books. It could be that the main purpose of these texts is the union between Ra and Osiris, and to embodize the acquitted souls in them. It's obligatory for the deceased to know the name of the gates and their guards, so that he can achieve his goal and live beside Osiris. The importance of that book becomes clear through one of its spells that exists in the first section, for the one who knows that spell can move things as he likes and travel in the sky, while the destiny of the one who is ignorant of them is annihilation. professor called Lesko presented a full study of the Book of the Two Ways and divided it into two sections. The first section starts with a description of the sunrise in the east horizon, accompanied by greetings of the deceased. He addresses the demons who are filling the roads so that they can allow him to pass. The second section pictures an area with many gates, which are guarded by the demon's guards. The deceased must pass through the gates. That's why he was called the captain of the sun boat, so that he can pass through these gates and its guards. The third and fourth section together represent the water and earth ways of the sky and the netherworld. There are many names and pictures of the demon's guards in the shape of a cosmic map through which the deceased passes in his morning and evening trip in the sun boat. The two sections start together through a spell, then the map is divided into two sections where there is a zigzag road in each of these sections. With these two sections, there is a separate section with a door colored in red and has the name of the fire or the flames in the upper section. And there are two other titles in the bottom part. The first is called The Gate of Darkness and the other is colored in red. Both of them is an entrance to the next roads. Usually, one of the demon guards stands on these gates, each of them in the shape of a crocodile with a ram head, holding with his human hand a knife. There were many opinions about the purpose of these two ways, for Keys saw that the purpose of the deceased journey is to reach the fields of Hotep, and that the two ways must meet each other there, which didn't happen except in one case, on the coffin. But the meeting here was in the coffin and not in the fields. Lab saw that the dead can choose between the two ways, or that the two ways reflect the Nile in its high and low forms. The third section of the Book of the Ways represent the upper blue celestial waterway in the Book of the Two Ways in the ancient religion of Egypt. That way is a balance area between Osiris and Ra, for the morning sky is where the sun boat travels, accompanied by the deceased. It's also a field inhabited by Osiris and the demons of the sky. In that section, the deceased is connected with the cities of Rustau and Beh, for he had joined the circle of fire, which guides Ra boat to pass through the demons, which means that he takes the role of one of the guides on the road. Thus, the deceased embodies a soul with a power that surpasses the other souls, and he accompanies God Ra in his daily journey, and Jehuti in the night along that waterway which pictures the sky. The talking at the end of the waterway revolves around the fields of Hotep and the service of the dead to Osiris, and that was mentioned in the spells, for the spells showed the field as a goal the dead hopes to reach, so that he doesn't die and is not attacked by an evil soul. The field of Hotep is the residence of the spirit which never dies, and thus the hope of the dead to see Osiris daily would be achieved. The lake ignited with fire is a lake of fire, and is a thing separating between the two ways. The deceased had to be committed to stick with a straight road to stay alive and not become dead in the lake of fire. If he tried to take a side road, of which the text warned against their dangers, it will lead straight to that lake, in which lies the fate of the guilty ones. A spell is found giving a strict warning against the danger of that lake, the lake of fire. The fourth section of the Book of the Two Ways is the Black Land Way under the ground. The section starts with a spell that joins between the water and the land ways together, in which the deceased begs God Ra, the sun god, to help him. So he says, "Hail to you, Ra. Wish you could make Osiris pleased with this deceased, so that those in the Tamhat could pray to you, and you're praised by those who dwell in the Duat. Wish you could make this deceased reach the level of praising God Ra daily." With the first part of the spell, we find two of the demon guards when the deceased wish not to be deprived of them. So he passes beneath the curve of the road. The other spell calls the deceased with the one with a great name. We meet some of the demons' guards, where we find an animal figure with 4 feet carrying a flail with his front feet. The human head turns backwards and has a feather. This guard is called the protector of the two gods. He is the guard of this curve. The other guard is called the guard of the lake. He is a guard who takes the shape of the rabbit. This land road ends with spells to pass under the lake, where the deceased demands a road for him so that Ra continues his trip. The fifth section talks about Rustau roads that exist on land and water. Here, there is a lot of mention of the demon's guards. The spell is a spell to pass, and it has the name of the 5 walls and point to pass on the road. There are guards in horizontal groups, and there is a text amongst them that mentions some of the demons, for the deceased addresses them to push them away from his road. In the 5th section of the Book of the Two Ways, the deceased asks the guarding gods in a spell to pave him the road. In another, he talks about he's the one who separated between the two partners, God Set and God Horus. One of the spells points to a place sealed in the dark, surrounded by flame. Inside it, there are secretions of the dead, divine body of Osiris. Another spell prevents harm or annihilation of the one seen there, while a second spell talks about traveling to Osiris' residence, for it mentions crossing in peace to the residence of Osiris across all gates. There are 2 spells that are characterized by presenting a summary of this section of the book. We find the deceased embodying himself in the figure of Osiris to overcome his enemies. It's noticeable that both spells exist on all coffins. The shortcut of the book ends at this stage, after the deceased could embody himself with God Osiris, the victorious over his enemies. The 6th section of the book is an imitation of the description of the netherworld and the confirmation of the existence of God Thoth, the god of Hermopolis. The name of this section and its connection with that came in the spell. The deceased sail in the night in the boat of God Ra in the sky. He faces a snake Apophis on the boat of Ra. One of the spells had the names of the demons which might exist in the house of Ma'at. The deceased might guide the eyes of Horus, the sun and the moon, and save the good eye from the snake of Apophis, according to one of the spells. The 7th section of the Book of the Two Ways has 1 spell, and it includes a list of the duties that the deceased Ra performs, and a description of the journey of the deceased on board the boat of Ra in the morning, and there is no figure that accompanies the spell. The eighth section is characterized by the existence of two groups of the guards of the gate, whose number reaches 7. For the first group is composed of 4 guards, and the second is composed of 3 guards, separated by those who salute those who don't know how to cross. The deceased must know the guards and their names, so that he can cross with the sun boat. The deceased travels to Horus the Great, who stays in the middle of the dome in heaven, through 7 celestial places across 7 gates. The last spell is about Horus the Great, who is the lord of Komombo Temple, whom the dead lives in his company. The 9th section is the last section in the Book of the Two Ways. It includes the content of the whole book and ties all the traditions that concern the netherworld and is a goal of the deceased. From the previous sections, we find the gods in the chapels and the boats that were described before. The one who knows the spells that are connected with Gatot and the moon will join him as a star in the sky. Those who know the spells connected with the House of Might and the sealed place of Osiris will be more revered than him. Finally, if he knew all the spells, he'll guarantee to be with Ra, and thus reaching Ra is the top of all the goals. This section starts with a spell that describes the area of the mirage of the sky, which starts with a flame and ends by darkness. The spell mentions that the deceased will live forever. The deceased addresses God Osiris to give his organs and bones the power and health. It's clear that the Book of the Two Ways made the life beside the sun god and the confirmation of living in the house of Osiris goals of the deceased.